Okay, thank you everyone and welcome to this webinar. This is the first one for us at Tillberg Design, so please bear with us if the technology is not running perfectly smooth. As I've said before, you do need to keep your microphone and camera turned off in order for this to work. Also, you might want to know that we will be recording the webinar, and you will be able to download that content if you ask for it. And the way you ask is by sending a mail to the mail address at the lower part of the screen. Questions. We would like you to ask questions, and we would like you to write that down into the chat forum. We will do our best to answer as many questions as possible.
Welcome everyone. It's wonderful to see so many of you logging in from all parts of the world. It's very exciting for us to bring all of you together for this seminar or webinar. So to begin with, who would ever have imagined only 3 months ago that we would even have a webinar like this? I think it's fair to say that this whole situation has taken most of us completely hands down, including governments, authorities, ship owners, and of course us as individuals. We don't know when it's going to end. We don't know when it's going to get better, but we all do know that when it does, we will not come back to the same point we were before this all started. We have friends among all the big corporations in the industry, and many of the small ones too. And we feel very strongly that we need to address this whole situation together, collectively. The message we get from discussions with our network is that there's a need for collaboration. So in the spirit of Winston Churchill, let's join forces and use this opportunity to really find a way forward as a community and do this together. And the reason for why I think it's so important that we do this together as an industry is that when people choose their vacation, they have an option to stay at a seaside resort instead if they want. Or they can go to a hotel in a big city or lots of other things. And so this webinar is therefore to be about how we can restore trust in the public eye to our industry. So we will focus on the positive things we can do within design, innovation, and show how to communicate the fact that a ship can, in fact, be one of the safest places to be in a pandemic like this. So again, the only thing we know for sure is that there will be another crisis again in a few years' time. So we better use every opportunity we can from this one and learn from what we have now to be a little better next time and be better prepared for the future. And in order to do so, we have brought together some of the brightest minds in the industry. We have Maurizio Eliseo representing Thalia Marine Services. And Thalia Marine, they are a team of interior architects, naval architects, marine engineers, charter consultants, surveyors, and so forth. So they have a wealth of experience within shipbuilding, ship surveying, quality work on ships, and so forth. Naval architecture. We also have with us Peter Hult from VIKAND. VIKAND is a leading expert in global maritime medical operations and healthcare. We're very glad to have you with us also, Peter. We have from the ship owner side, we have Shannon Lee from Storylines, a fresh new player in the market who's going to offer affordable living at sea, so a residential cruise line. And last but not least, we have Hampton Bridwell from Tenet Partners. You may know Tenet Partners is a well-known brand innovation and marketing consultancy. So all these bright minds will bring the best of knowledge to the table today. And so what we will do is we will hand the picture and microphones over to them all. One by one to present their thinking on how we move forward. And following that, we will have a period of questions, a little Q&A session, and then we will also answer some of the questions that will come in through our chat line or our mail 9. So having said that, I will hand the mic over to Maurizio Eliseo for your presentation. So take it away, Maurizio.
So I will try to be as brief as possible. Thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this very welcome opportunity of cooperation, as both Per and Fredrik said. I always said since the very beginning that there are lessons from the past that can be learned, and we can have a look to the present situation and also make some hints and ideas for what could be the future of the cruise industry, the adaptation of existing ships and the future cruise ships. I am not going to bore you with the historical part, but I think that is worth to give you just a very, very brief summary of the history of ships, of passenger ships, and connected with the epidemic on board. The era of Great Migration from 1880 to 1914, so when the First World War broke out, can be considered, of course, one of the first period to be analyzed because epidemics on board were very frequent. The topic was suddenly taken to the highlights of the newspaper of the public at the beginning of February of 2020. And one of the reasons I was also, I guess, invited by Tillberg to join the conversation is that besides a long time cooperation,
are you on Teams?
With the Princess Cruises,
yeah, I'm just
captain of the ship of Diamond Princess is a former colleague and very good friend of mine. So I had a very frequent connections with him and on the update of what was going on and was happening. Indeed, we took the liberty on our social media, such as this LinkedIn page, to give some hints to the industry since the very beginning that have been scientifically proved and which use a very simple and efficient means for the sanitation of ashore buildings and also on board the ships. And we actually, in my past career as a DPA, as a fleet superintendent of 11 cruise ships, I have used successfully. You remember, for instance, one of the earliest crises in history that was connected with with norovirus, and most recently also, most recent one was the crisis we had with the foot and mouth disease that affected the industry. So we had to take steps about that, and so some connection with the past was not such bad, because some suggestions could be updated and used for that. What we published were several articles, so we are not talking of nothing new, where oxygen is, let's say, is somehow the main character for the destruction of virus and bacteria. I'm not entering into the subject, but we have to keep in mind that there are two completely different things, whether bacteria are living beings, while viruses, like a computer ones, are a sort of program which can deviate the normal activity of your software, and also from inside the human beings and our DNA, there is a so-called a software, if you can call it, that can be indeed misleaded by the so-called RNA, that is this part constituted by a virus. But of course, I would leave to medical doctors and virologists to enter into these technical details. Going back to a very brief history, I just recall you that the present cruise ships are somehow grandparents to the ocean liners that they were more similar to what nowadays jet planes were carrying thousands of ships or thousands of people all over the world. So the first mass transportation and the social exchange between the continents of the world started with the Industrial Revolution. I am just showing you the general arrangement plan of the vessel of the early 20th century, and if we go close to it, we just show you that if the passengers on board were almost 3,000, of them 1,500 were mainly immigrants, but to them it was devoted only 25% of the space of the ships. So you can imagine the congestion and the risk of pandemics, of epidemics that was constantly to be fighted on board these vessels. If the first class was occupying 75% with their glamorous and luxury huge style lounges, to the 1,500 people, and they were just 105,000 people that were carried mainly in bunk beds, that you can see easily from these pictures the situation, how it was. So they were carried in dormitories where up to 250 people divided between men on one side and women and kids in the others were kept. And even on luxurious ships at the time, you could expect a bathroom every 12 passengers average. And for immigrants, there was about one bath, one restroom, and one shower every 100 people on board. And the hygienic condition of these people were, of course, very difficult. They had no public facilities. They had to eat in the same dormitories where they were spending much of the time. The only place, public space available was the forecastle of the vessel that, of course, was always in the danger of strong winds and waves, above all when you consider that big ships of those days were vessels of 10, 15, 20,000 tons. So nothing compared to the size of the ships that we are used to deal with nowadays, cruise ships of nowadays. And you have also to consider that the crossing was in 2-3 weeks, so it was very hard and the public decks, the forecastle could be crowded only when the weather was permitting. Epidemic on board was constant, as I just give you a case of a ship that left in the first years of the 20th century for the United States with 1,500 immigrants on board. They were quarantined owing to cholera and then measles and also scarlet fever, that of which there were outbreaks on board. They were very common. So out of these 1,500 people on board, 1,100 had to be buried at sea, and only 400 survived the quarantine of these ships. This was quite common, but at least there was a shock in the public opinion. So the first rules were issued for healthier conditions on board ships, which mainly meant to give hygienic facilities to these people. And for instance, just to give you an example, the water was kept in tanks, and you had to drink them the water from iron pipes, sucking it from it. So, for instance, it was told to ship owners that you had to loan to the passengers on board some sort of glasses, not to suck the water from the same pipe. And we are just talking of about 100 years ago, not so much time ago. The introduction of the sanitation rules brought in the period of the golden age of travel between the 20s and the 40s, when hundreds and hundreds of liners were crossing the Atlantic, but not only the Atlantic, of course, the opportunity of giving very healthier and safer conditions. First of all, you have to think that migration was close to the United States between the two great wars. And so a new class of passengers was created, that was the tourist passengers, which catered for the middle class, and so for people that were going the other way around. So we are talking of Americans that mainly wished to come as a tourist to Europe to visit the old world. And they didn't want to travel in facilities like the dormitories of that were used for immigrants, but in a certain kind of style of luxury that brought to the birth of what was became known as the transatlantic style. Cruises started to become an opportunity. So in low season on the transatlantic routes, ships were also used for pleasure voyages. At the time, the term cruise was not even known with the meaning of today, because people was thinking of ships of bad places to stay for owing to the risk of epidemics. And so going at sea was out of needs more out of the pleasure of doing it. But this changed quickly thanks to the introduction of systems, which was mainly ozonizers, so the use of ozone on board, that the pandemic and the epidemic on boards were hugely reduced. Curiously enough, the use of ozone was introduced to reduce the smell. We have to think of technologies the facilities we have nowadays. But anyhow, it managed to reduce from the statistics that we do have hugely the pandemics, the epidemics, and the first studies were made on the use of ozone as a virus and bacteria destroying agent. The Diamond Princess case was, of course, a case of unpreparedness, and there were many contingency attempts by the cruise industry when the ship that, of course, struck the attention on the headlines of the newspaper worldwide, the news worldwide, and so of the public, had been seen again as a very dangerous place to be. Despite, in fact, with the high technology they have on board, they can be the other way around. So they can be much safer than what are buildings ashore. Indeed, as the pandemic of the COVID-19 unfortunately spread all over the world, we know that hospitals, medical centers, nursing houses, and other public places became as much dangerous, if not more dangerous, than what ships have been and proved to be. It's very unfortunate that, as it happened in my country with Lombardy, the first region in Europe to be struck by the pandemic, also a ship had this very unfortunate event that happened. But this is, something that, of course, was not possible to control. There was, thanks to the ingenuity, to the inventiveness, and to the great efficiency of the crew on board, captained by Gennaro Arma, with whom over the years I managed to create a great relationship, and also through him being in contact with the ship, with the company, and giving some of the suggestions coming from previous crises we had to face during my years in the management of cruise ships, that were at the end successful and managed at least to reduce the impact of a situation that was mainly disastrously managed by the ashore authorities. There is no blame against any country for doing that, but as I am talking of opportunities of trying to find solutions for for the present existing ships and for future ships, not only the designer of vessels, but also, of course, the whole industry and the port authorities and the ashore technical management of cruise companies must take their part of responsibilities, because otherwise all the attempts made by us who are designing ships, so mainly naval architects, interior designers and marine engineers, we can cooperate, but then from the technical operation side it must be and from the housekeeping warships, it must be full cooperation for procedures. For instance, the use of ozonizers for the disinfection of the thousands of pieces of luggages could be done in a shore maritime station instead of on board. During the lesson learned of foot and mouth disease of 2001, one of the best ways for keeping not only on ships but also in maritime stations before boarding the ship the avoidance of bringing the pathogen and the infectious metals on board was the use of carpets which were soaked with hydrogen peroxide, something that again with the machine that you can see can just not only be bought and stored on board, but easily produced by the ship without having to load and waste space or use expensive materials and chemicals. For the time being, one of the best solutions to be used in cabins is just portable ozonizers, which can produce from 1,000 milligrams to 5,000 per hour, depending on the size. They are very economic and very easy to use. I mean, we don't have the time to show you the curves, but it just takes from 20 to 25 minutes to completely destroy the presence of any bacteria or residual virus on board. These other systems, which again use a very simple and inexpensive product like hydrogen peroxide, are the diffusers that can be used in the public areas and which are portable and can cover very, very large surfaces depending on their size. And again, we are talking of instruments which are absolutely available on the market and doesn't need so much technology to be adapted to vessels. The problem is that we have to integrate these systems with existing ones on ships so that they can be done through the HVAC main systems and the main ventilation stations which are on each vessel. even the catering and the provision areas through ozone can wash what is taken on board in terms of vegetables and fruits on board. Another small example I want to mention is the presence, you have seen for sure, of thousands and thousands of towel dispensers on all the doors of restrooms, spa, and other places on ships. Of course, there is the possibility to motorize the doors to avoid the contact with the handles, but another very simple system is to use ultraviolet lamps positioned just above the handles of restrooms and other public doors which are used by the public, and without causing any harms can destroy efficiently in few minutes these residual possible pathogen agents. For the new vessels, what we have to do is to integrate the flow charts of the HVAC systems and of the water chlorination systems with these instruments that I have just illustrated to you to make them permanent on board. There are huge opportunities without a huge financial impact. So we are talking of a very, very small, almost negligible percentage of cost to build ships, whether the ventilation stations contains systems that when the public areas are not used, they can be easily cleaned without jeopardizing the opportunity of the housekeeping department to carry on its work, because we are talking again of a decay product from these chemicals, which is just ozone or oxygen, and so they are not dangerous, and the ventilation can easily clean up the area after just a few dozen minutes of use. This is one of the experimental ventilation stations that is being implemented by a university to be provided not only on ships, but why not on ships? This is for hospitals and nursing facilities. A very last hint for interior designers is to have a good knowledge of what is the passenger vessel sanitation program, so what is the former PHS, which is issued by the United States Center for the Disease Control Committee, and also the guidelines for passenger vessels accessibility. I put in red the IMO's Safe Return to Port because it's a sort of marriage and traps with the above rules. Sometimes there are clashes, but both the sanitation programs that is used, for instance, for the design of galleys can be easily adapted also in the design of public spaces accessible to the passengers. I have just picked up pictures from, our huge database, and I am going through it very, very quickly. But avoiding the use of sharp corners, avoiding the use of lining which are difficult to clean, or features, decorative features which are dust collecting, maybe choosing furniture which are easy to clean and avoid gaps or surfaces which can be impregnated by pathogen metals, as well as avoiding dust collecting features, above all on top of dining facilities, as well as the extension of hard and easy cleanable surfaces for floors instead of carpet, which of course becomes extremely more difficult to keep clean, can be also very easy hints for the design of future vessels. The avoidance of gaps and the use of rounded corners when you have to connect vertical surfaces, lining and furniture with floors is also a simple and a good suggestion amongst the many that can be found in these guidelines. I sent to Tillberg Design some of the links where you can find more details of these very quick suggestions that I mentioned. And I just wish everybody this picture of the captain of the Diamond Princess leaving the ship as the last member of the crew can be soon reversed, because I think that from all the crises, there is always an opportunity for improvement and of changement. This is a lesson from history, and I really see no reasons why ships can become an opportunity for giving, as it happened in the past, a suggestion for healthier and safer environments, also for the ashore construction guidelines. So thank you for your attention, and really our best wishes of good health to all of you.
Much, Maurizio, for all your insights there. That was very useful, very interesting, wealth of knowledge there. So many thanks to you. I hope we can, that we can share the presentations with you with everybody who is listening also. Hope that is okay. So we're now passing the microphone to a real expert in scientific and medical innovations. Sorry, was I interrupting somebody? Okay. We are turning the microphone over to Peter Hult of VIKAND. You may know VIKAND as the company who they are known to turn problems into opportunities within medical innovations on ships, and create solutions that increase the health and well-being of their staff, crew and guests in a sustainable and environmentally friendly way also. Over to you, Peter. Take it away.
Thank you very much, Fredrik, and thank you, Per and Tillberg, for hosting this webinar today. And I echo your view that this has to be a collaborative focus into the future of how we improve the cruise and the maritime industry and its response to this COVID-19 situation. Maurizio, I appreciate your presentation, and I will piggyback off some of your comments in your presentation. And it's also a pleasure to meet everyone on this call today. And the way we view this conversation is amongst friends and colleagues. So this is just a general discussion, and I just highlight that nothing that we're sharing today is meant to be policy or meant to be the direction of any kind of regulatory agency. So let's get started. Just a quick agenda on what we're planning to discuss today. And then on to VIKAND. If I can just do a very quick introduction to VIKAND. VIKAND means we can in Swedish. We are a global healthcare provider that provide medical services to the cruise industry, maritime industry, and the remote industry. We manage the healthcare facilities on board about 60 cruise ships today. We provide medical services to a further about 200 cruise ships around the world today. In those services include everything from biomedical equipment management and servicing, case management, medical escort services for crew and guests that needs to be disembarked from a ship. We also provide mental wellness programs for the crew on ships. And as you can imagine, those type of services today are really important. We do work very closely with the industry associations, flag states, classification societies, and regulators to kind of correlate the regulations and what we think is going to happen within the maritime and healthcare industry going into the future. But it's still a bit of reading the tea leaves in your cup. But I think we're starting to see a bit of a direction of where we are going to head within the cruise industry. But something that I think is very important for all of us to accept and agree. First of all, 2020 is hindsight. And one can argue that there was a few mistakes happening with Princess Diamond, the Diamond Princess, but one also have to remember to put ourselves in their shoes as it happened and where we were at the time. So I would say that without the 2020 hindsight, yes, there was probably a few mistakes, but I will also say that they did a very good job. And as I think also in the cruise industry, we all know that the cruise industry have a very high sanitation focus. They work very hard on public health and hygiene. And even 2 months ago, I would say that the cruise industry had the highest standard when it came to public health and sanitation. Now, everything can be improved, and the cruise industry is in a perfect position to continue to improve on their processes, on their sanitation protocol, medical operations, and as well as they're very poised to work within the innovation space of coming up with new solutions for sanitation, medical, and prevention, which we will talk about today as well. Just a little quick graph. I'm not going to spend too much time on this one. I'm going to spend more time on the second one, which looks very similar. But the challenges that we had over the past few weeks and months was basically threefold. One, we did not know what kind of concerns we brought on board with COVID-19. Two, we were not aware of, and we were not, there's still a lot to learn about COVID-19. So the way we treated and managed COVID-19 6 weeks ago is not exactly the same we're doing it today. So we've learned a lot. And then thirdly, and this is the point where I think we as an industry had a huge problem and why the industry got somewhat of a bad reputation. And that is when the global nations, that the countries around the world decided to not allow guests and crew to seek higher level of care in the ports that they visited, or even accept ships into the ports. That's when we had a big challenge. So traditionally, the ships are not meant to be ICUs. They're not meant to treat people for weeks on end. They're not meant to have ships sailing for 50 days to seek medical treatment. Ships generally would be able to access care close to shore, and that's something that we did not receive. And that was a total breakdown when it comes to the global maritime environment to not have access to that. So that's where our biggest challenge was. As a result of that, we had huge amount of people that were stuck on board ships for weeks and months that otherwise would have not been on board. And that's where this whole outbreak happened. And as a result of that, the medical team on board, which it's a great team, they're doing a very good job, but when they have hundreds of people needing medical care, it becomes a problem. And as a result of that, unfortunately, we saw several guests and crew dying as a result of the inability to seek shoreside care. So that's an area where we have a passionate issue with where we ended up. Looking into the future, we see that there is a lot of tools that are coming online that will be very helpful. I'm going to spend a little bit of time around the prevention side, the testing. We all know the testing, and I'm not a doctor, but we have a lot of medical staff in our organization, and we'll talk about this for hours every day. Testing is going to be a critical component going into the future for the cruise industry. We need to test the passengers and we need to test the crew. We need to have as accurate testing as possible and as efficient testing as possible and as affordable testing as possible. As you all may remember, if you cast your memory back about 4, 5, 6 weeks ago, everyone came out with their quick tests. The quick test, everyone wanted quick test. Their little fingerprint, and was basically a diabetes test. You took a little bit of blood and finally you found out if you had COVID-19 or not. And then slowly they realized that this quick test is not as accurate as one would like. And it doesn't give you any results unless you are symptomatic, which can be 6, 7, 8 days from the point you've been infected. So the quick tests are a good tool to use, but it's not conclusive, and CDC does not view the quick test as a good tool to diagnose somebody categorically. Let's move to PCR testing. PCR is the test where you do the nasal swab, throat swab, and you put it into an enzyme liquid, you run it through the machine, and you will see if you have the infection. And you can see that almost immediately because the COVID-19 virus gets stuck in your nose, then in your throat, and then it transcends down into your lungs. So the PCR testing is the most accurate test to see if you have COVID-19. The challenge with that is that a few weeks ago, it took 24 to 48 hours to get a test result. Then new machines came on the market. You've heard of several of them. I'm sure Abbott machine, the Abbott machine, you've heard about that one. They now are able to test on 5 to 30 minutes, which is great. The challenge is that you still have to stick a thing up your nose, poke it around under your eye for a few seconds, and then put it into the machine. Can be quite challenging, but that is the tool we have available today to be able to do the pre-testing. Going into the future, I am excited to see what's in the pipeline. Into the future, there is new testing protocols that are coming into play. One is a saliva-based testing protocol that doesn't even need a machine. It's a PCR approach where you just put saliva into a test tube, you shake it up a bit, and 20 minutes later, you're going to be able to see if you have COVID-19 or not. And there's also breathalyzer tests that are just coming down the pipe that are really, really accurate as well. And they're all going through their FDA approval process, and we're excited to see how this is going to come into force. And that will make testing very convenient, very affordable, and very quick. So when we look into the future in terms of the mitigation level, the prevention level, we are, I think, going to find some really good testing protocols that can be provided to both guest and crew in advance of them leaving their home, when they come to the ship, and then further, we then have to have our prevention protocols while you're on board the ship. And the prevention protocols include testing. I'm talking about testing. And testing, you will see testing both when people come back from shoreside as well as random testing on board. But also during the period of time when you're on board, we now see many new technologies and solutions coming to market that will mitigate and provide a safer environment on board. Maurizio was talking about ozone earlier. That is one great tool. There's other air sanitation tools that we think are very valuable at bring down the pathogen level in air. And then whenever you bring new pathogens, viruses and bacteria, they will address those within minutes and create a much safer environment. We have great surface sanitation tools and products coming to market. And from our perspective, we love those new products because many of them are food grade, no rinse, and have a much higher kill rate, faster kill rate than many of the chemical-based products out there. So we always go for natural, no rinse, food grade, technology solution, product solutions. And then finally, cross-contamination is an area that we need to look at as well, where you reduce the amount of cross-contamination. And I'm going to talk about some of those products later on in this presentation. A friend of mine spoke about a no-touch ship into the future, and on all of you great naval architects out there, I definitely could see us really need to work on a no-touch environment in the cruise industry, from doors opening automatically to food just popping out of the restaurant automatically, no buffets and so on. And I think we really need to focus on the no-touch environment into the future as well. When it comes to when you have an outbreak on board, an area where we will focus and we are working very actively at the moment is to enhance, improve the medical operations on board. As many of you may know, there is very detailed discussions going on in the cruise industry and some of the regulators in the US about the structure of healthcare in the cruise industry in the future. I'm not going to go into too much detail there because it's sensitive to see where we end up, but I don't think there is any surprise in that there's a focus on setting up ships with ICUs. There is discussions about wanting to have ICUs on board ships to be able to care for guests up to 7 days on board the ship. I think the cruise industry has been very good at providing an urgent care facility on board, but the cruise ships were never meant to provide an ICU type scenario on board the ship where you need to have doctors and nurses provide ICU care for 24/7 with medical oxygen being provided. It's 80 liters a day to provide oxygen on somebody that needs ventilation for 24 hours. Those are really challenging situations, and we question if it's the right approach to keep guests and crew that need ICU care on board a ship. We would much prefer that we bring those guests shoreside to a higher level of care in a hospital. And I hope that we can still continue to do that in the future and work with port states and countries that they will accept guests and crew that require higher level of care. That aside, we do think that there is room for improvement of healthcare on board ship. And we can see that both in terms of space, equipment, maybe a certain level of training will be improved. We can see that there will be requirements for additional wards. Maybe one can call them mini ICUs. We do see requirement for cruise ships to carry isolation zones, so dedicated cabins, most likely on the dedicated HVAC system that have an isolation zone. There is quarantine zones for people that need to be quarantined when they're coming aboard. Those type of things we see will come into play for sure. Just a side note, I think there's a lot of questions around the discussion around having an age limit of people taking a cruise of 70, as well as people with certain pre-existing conditions. It's our view that age, we should not be so concerned about the age as a chronological issue, more as a physiological issue. We all know, and I'm sure you all have friends who are in the 70s and 80s that still can run a marathon. And certainly, I'm in my 40s and I would never be able to run a marathon. So I don't think that we should put an arbitrary age on it. We need to be mindful about people's physical health to come on board a cruise ship. And I think that's a really important aspect of going into cruising into the future. But putting an arbitrary age might just be a real challenge. And I don't think it would be fair to guests that are young 70s to not being able to cruise without having to go through the process of having a doctor. At the end, a doctor's note, at the end of the day, we want to create a really safe environment on board a ship. And we work very actively with all of our cruise line partners and regulators to come up with a good plan. There is a no sail order in the US at the moment, going to end sometime mid-July. There is a requirement within that no sail order for certain parameters to be able to run a vessel by the end of July. But we haven't yet seen any kind of guidance of what regulations are going to come forward post the no sail order. So what VIKAND has done, we're working with our client base. We have a white paper, a re-entry to cruising paper where we talk about all of the areas that I think a cruise line operator or maritime operator, commercial operator, yacht operator, fishing vessel operator, or energy vessel operator, what they need to do to bring their ships back into service. So we're trying to be proactive with our client base. We're trying to be proactive with the cruise industry, but there is thousands of things to think about when it comes to managing healthcare and public health in the cruise industry. Before I move on to the next slide, I think I just want to highlight that while in the past in the cruise industry, everything was about the guest experience or the ports that you're going to or the amenities on the ship. Now we believe that a ship will be defined by the standards of healthcare and public health. That will be the red thread within the cruise industry. So in addition to providing technology tools, in addition to providing testing, you need to provide really good training. And I believe that every person on board a cruise ship that works on a ship will be part of the public health team to make sure that you manage the safety, the health of the ship, as well as they will be trained in recognizing if a guest or crew are not feeling well. There is a question around temperature. I've heard about that. Obviously, that was what we thought 6 weeks ago, 8 weeks ago. We thought that screening for temperature was the way to go to detect anyone with COVID-19. We now realize that I think it's 1/3 of the COVID-19 infected people have a temperature. So why are we still continuing to do temperature screening? Well, it's because we can detect 1/3. It is very important. There is no 100% tool today that we can work with. It is a number of tools in the tool chest, then you bundle that together and you come to a conclusion. So that's where we are on the temperature screening, which people have been asking about. VIKAND, we have had the pleasure or the unfortunate situation to support 8 cruise ships with significant COVID-19 exposure around the world. We've worked in South America, we've worked in Europe, we've worked in Australia, and I will tell you that the overriding message I would like to share is that for the most part, I don't know where humanity went the moment COVID-19 appeared. The challenges that we have faced with our cruise line partners, and many of you are on this call today, the challenges we had to face to be able to access higher level of care in shoreside ports were just shocking, to say the very least. And I think as a result of that, there were situations that should have not happened. But we worked through it. It's very difficult. The management team on those ships worked 24/7. The medical teams work 24/7. No medical team on any ship is set up to take care of an influx of number of guests to the point that we have to take care of. The shoreside support and collaboration amongst the cruise line and the various departments in the cruise lines and ourselves were really amazing. And I will say that Fredrik and Per are talking about collaboration. We did see a lot of collaboration in the cruise industry. And I see a uniformity within the cruise industry working to find good solutions for the COVID-19 and any other kind of pandemic or communicable diseases in the future, such as norovirus, which we've had for quite a while. Talking about new technologies, and I'm almost done here. Maurizio was talking about ozone. Part of that same family, you have something called hydroxyls. Hydroxyls are being generated naturally outdoors, and it's really the way the Earth atmosphere and the Earth is cleaning itself. So hydroxyls basically are called the nature's detergent by NASA. NASA was using hydroxyls as a way to purify air within their program. We have been able to work with a manufacturer, and we have hydroxyl generation within an environment, and we achieve the same type of sanitation rate as you do outdoors. So when you saturate the indoor environment with this green, natural, and FDA-approved hydroxyls, you basically create an immune system for the ship. An immune system that will reduce your pathogen load naturally and drastically on board. And then anytime you introduce a new pathogen, such as COVID-19, the hydroxyls will ensure a 99% sanitation in the first 15 minutes and a further 99.9% within an hour. And on surfaces, it will have every 3 hours, it will sanitize all of the surfaces within that environment. So for us, hydroxyl-based are natural. We can live with it. It's not lethal. And I think every ship in the world should have this immune system on their ships. So another technology that we really like, again, we have talked about the air sanitation. We all know about the surface sanitation. Surface sanitation, again, we need to work with technologies that are natural, that are food grade, no rinse, and high kill rates. We also need to work on the other aspect, which is the cross-contamination with your hands. At the moment, in the industry, we have an honor-based system when it comes to hand washing. This company here that is based out of New York have created a technology that can validate if your hands are clean or not after you've washed your hands. So you wash your hands, you put your hands under this technology, Within a few seconds, this technology is going to give you a pass or no pass if your hands are clean of viruses and bacteria. If you are not passing, you will have to rewash and then check your hands again. If you fail again, which would be terrible, then there is a notice that can go out to your public health person on board. Also, if you're not showing up on the list of people that are washing their hands and you're a chef in the galley, that would be a problem as well. So you can actually measure for the first time ever your hand wash efficacy on board the ship, as well as see at what point during the day you have difficulties with hand wash. So now you've created a sanitation where there you have surface sanitation, you have hand sanitation, you need to sanitize anything that comes on your ship, such as your provisioning, training protocols to enhance the crew on board, their ability to manage public health. Now you're starting to see a really good package coming out in terms of managing your onboard safety. Thank you very much. I tried to do this very quick, Fredrik and Per, and we can take some questions later on, but I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you guys today.
Thank you very much, Peter. That was a presentation jam-packed with facts and figures and lots of interesting innovation also. I'm sure everybody's been listening with big ears and making lots of notes. I certainly have. So thank you so much for that, Peter. I hope it's also okay if we share the presentation with the audience afterwards. Yeah, great. Okay, so it's time for our next guest. I think one of the things we can all see in the new cruise prospects we have on our drawing boards is that they all have some advantages right now. All the new players in the industry, the ones that are developing new cruise brands. There are of course no cost of having a fleet laying still, which is obvious to everyone. But they also have the opportunity to design their new ships to comply with all these new demands and expectations that we are seeing today. One of them are Storylines, who market themselves as the safest place in the world to be. So that is going to be very interesting to hear what Shannon is going to tell us about that. And apart from designing a safe haven at sea, they also determined to do this and include all the luxuries without impacting or having minimal impact on the environment. And that's something we're going to discuss later on, is the potential conflict between the measures we have to take now for this current crisis, and then on the sustainability aspect of things, and how to balance that. But we'll get back to that, and I'll hand sound and picture over to Shannon Lee from Storylines. Take it away, Shannon.
Okay, thanks very much, Tillberg and Peter, for your fantastic presentation there. I'll kick off with a little bit of an introduction on what Storylines is, and we're basically a residential cruise model, and we've been at this for just under 4 years now. And just to start off, I'd like to play a little bit of a video that demonstrates what we're doing, and then I'm going to go through a couple of slides.
The safest place on Earth to live, especially during a pandemic, is a floating island safe haven that can travel wherever its residents want. Not another cruise line, but your own luxurious floating residential community, like a gated estate, but with the ability to up and move to a safe location in uncertain times. We can react quickly to our residents' decisions. We don't have to wait for governments to decide what's best for us. With safe hospital-grade cleaning processes in public spaces, food preparation areas, and air conditioning systems that use ozone and hydroxyl sterilization to keep you and the ship clean and safe. Installed in each residence are personal hydroxyl units, plus ultraviolet and ozone cleaning can be activated by the press of a button as you walk out the door for the day's activities. Learn more about this on our website. Advanced clear air and surface treatments mean residents are safer by design than they are on land. Better living spaces for everyone, including the crew. Healthy air, healthy, fresh, delicious food and the latest in clean, safe treatment technologies. And if the world falls apart, wouldn't you rather be apart from it?
Okay, so that was just a little short presentation on all the things that we're doing to basically get in front of this. Now, we've been lucky enough to be ahead of this from the start, I think, because we've always been practicing good design when it comes to health and those kinds of things. And one of the things that we had to consider was our average age is actually 54, and it's a pretty wide variant, similar to a traditional cruise line. So our youngest person or owner on board is 34, and our oldest 86 at this point in time. So right from the start, we wanted to adopt a low person to space ratio. We wanted to delete buffets, remove as many touch points as we could, and we've been doing this for 3 years now. Okay, one of the big design challenges we had is that in public spaces we wanted that area to open up into the and enjoy the sea and fresh air. And engineers were very negative towards this, saying no, no, no. And being a young player in the game and really not really liking the word no, we just simply asked why not, and work with engineers to find solutions to do that. And that just resulted in basic sensors turning off HVAC systems to not overload systems while fresh air coming in. As you can see, from the video, we've adopted a lot of new technology, and that's been just complete. We always planned on doing this, but it wasn't in our design brief until next year. And obviously with COVID-19, we actually started getting ahead of this in January. Sort of, I was in Asia at the time, and we were already subjected, being in Asia for 6 months prior to that, the temperature testing and things like that. So I got to understand a lot of that by being in Asia, and that was as a result from SARS. So we had a little bit of an advanced warning for ourselves, and we started to get ahead of that. The next big thing that Storylines is doing is it's not just about health and cruise. We believe the two going hand in hand, and it's not just about being sick. We've actually moved the hospital. Well, we actually had the hospital and the health kiosk, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a minute, but the hospital on deck 5. Okay, so instead of that horrible process of going down into the firmatory, into the bowels of the ship, where it's all dark and very, very little windows and so forth, it's part of our onboarding process. When you come through the lobby, okay, you're actually right next to health kiosks and the hospital and the education area and so forth. And what that's going to allow us to do is the health kiosks can measure your vitals and things like that. So we have wearable technology that we're developing at the moment that can sync in with a proprietary piece of hardware and also traditional smartwatches to measure various vitals. And those vitals will be forwarded to the onboard doctor, and if there's discrepancies or things like that, the doctor can get in front of certain things. One of the big things that we've been on the front line of is bringing a complementary doctor visit. Like, as we're a residential model, we thought it was more important, instead of price gouging clients and them getting $4,000 and $6,000 bills for a small hospital visit on board, that people can feel confident that if there is a problem, that it's not a big profit center for us. We make money in other areas. Other things that we've got on board is a wellness room, and that incorporates things like mental wellness. It's available for clients and crew, physio, immune therapies, and we've also got pharmacists and a pharmacy on board, which it's not listed on the plan here, but it is there. We have brought forward what we call a pandemic-proof latest design, which was outlined in the video. We've got ample room to move, so you know, our space to size ratio is much different to a traditional cruise ship. And one of the big things that we believe is that this is really it's not our problem, it's not the client's problem, this is an industry problem that we should be working collectively to solve. And we do really believe that Storylines has had an advantage here because we've been designing a safer ship for 3 years. So it was very easy for us to put together a program that is making our clients feel safer. And as a result of that, when this pandemic broke out, we were gearing up for 50% cancellations. And that was it was a fearful time for us being a new player in the game. And through fast acting, communication, bringing on the right experts, we were able to reduce that to only a 2% cancellation rate. And so that's something we're really proud of. And yeah, again, I'd just like to thank everybody for listening. If you've got any questions, please put them forward to me. I'll post up my email in the chat, and I can share this presentation if anyone's interested. As it's got a few more visuals and so forth. I'm aware of time, and I know everybody's busy, so I'll hand it off to the next presenter. Thanks very much.
Shannon, this is Hampton, and I'm the CEO of Tenet Partners, and I've had the pleasure of working with Shannon on building the Storylines brand over the past few years. It's been a fascinating journey to go through that, and, but I'll step back for a second and talk a little bit about what our firm does and how we help companies sort of solve these challenges. And what we're hearing from a lot of clients today as it relates to how they're going to emerge for the brand. So starting at a baseline, you know, your brand ultimately is a set of actions and behaviors that your company designs and puts into the marketplace, and the perceptions of those are your brand. And one of the things that we really believe to be core in all of that is the culture of what the company is all about and what it stands for. And if you look across the cruise industry, just as a microcosm of many industries that are out there, their brands are really quite distinct and different from each other in what they promise and what they deliver. And one of the big challenges going forward is how these brands are going to be able to take who they are, what they are, and now translate it into a whole new set of attributes that are going to really resonate with consumers going forward, but still be true to themselves. And so we'll talk a little bit about how the world is rearranging itself and the perceptions of the cruise industry, and potentially how the brands have to react to that. But one of the things that, again, I think I just want to underscore as it relates to this challenge that's in front of us that Peter mentioned as it relates to health and safety, that probably one of the biggest drivers of delivering health and safety is the behavior, the culture of the organization. And what people do makes a real difference. They can be trained all day, but if you are not lined up very tightly to what the brand is all about, then it's really hard to execute on that promise. And so and if you think of that in the context of Disney or any number of brands that are highly experiential in what they do, they really create that alignment between their culture to be able to execute. Now that health and safety is going to be a primary driver of brands moving forward, that's going to be a challenge, is changing that culture and behavior. So to talk a little bit about the Storylines journey, this has been interesting because where we began on this was really understanding micro trends that were driving the cruise industry and looking for a crack in what was being delivered in years previous to something that could be new and innovative in the years to the future. And those trends were really all about being at home, safety and security, and being able to have a level of sensitivity and engagement with the cultures of the world. And that all sounds at odds with each other in great part, but the Storylines brand has been able to stitch those things together to be able to make something really special and innovative. So the opportunity there for this new brand was all about being able to stitch those things together to create something entirely new. Now, as we've been in this pandemic and what it's going to be coming out of it, those attributes that were these micro trends are now the macro trends. And we'll show that in the research that we conducted this past week that looked at pre and COVID and post-COVID consumer behaviors and attitudes towards the cruise industry. So what's really interesting, what's really exciting, I think, in many ways, and a huge opportunity for the cruise industry is to really think about what the future is going to be. So actually, if you could step back one slide. So when we did this research, the pre-COVID drivers, and when we talk about drivers, it's like, what is it that makes people want to make a purchase? And what are the considerations around that purchase? And it's really around the experiences during the cruise. That was the pre-COVID, and those were all the things that we know well about entertainment and gaming and so forth. Post-COVID, there's a clear indication that passengers are experiencing this uncertainty. And the immediate challenge is there's an economic one. And the cruise industry, some players are doing a great job in what we noticed in our research. And others are really struggling to be able to respond because their culture isn't really built to be able to handle this at the scale that they are operating. And then the other thing that we've seen here is health and hygiene, which was always a part of, and Peter mentioned this before, it was always a part of what the cruise industry is about. However, it's now emerged as one of the primary drivers. And, it's how companies sort of incorporate this into the design of their brands has to be authentic to who they are. It's not one blanket answer to everybody. And the way they deliver the health and safety experience is going to be different. It will have some institutional qualities in terms of process and procedure, but the way a company might go about delivering it can be authentic to who they are and be special in that way and create market and competitive advantage. So that's a really exciting opportunity for some of the brands, especially ones that own embarking capability to be able to deliver that in a unique way. And then ports are going to be redesigning this as well. So it's really an interesting time. So next slide, Shannon. So what we did in this research, and our partner ClueTrack conducted this. It just came in yesterday. We're still analyzing the results. All the major brands are covered in the research, but for today's purposes, we're only going to be looking at sort of the top line issues that came out of it. But what we did was ClueTrack looked at 34,000 pre-COVID customer conversations in the digital environment online, and 20,000, basically 21,000 post-COVID since the eruption of the whole crisis began. And so what we're seeing is really a pre and post world and the kind of attributes that are driving. Next slide. So pre-COVID drivers, these are ones that would look very familiar for every player in the industry. Common areas like pools and things of that nature, gaming, staff behavior, room services, food and dining, and entertainment. And the way that the brands across the industry compete on these capabilities, again, is different. But, just as this past year, the primary message across the whole industry was about scaling each of these attributes to larger and larger capabilities for a particular ship. And that actually is going to be a big challenge unto itself, because so much investment has gone into these attributes and these drivers for the companies, that it's really going to present a challenge, because what consumers are going to care about going forward might not necessarily be these items that have driven competition up to this point in time. Next slide. So post-COVID, or during, it's probably be a better way to title the slide, this was actually a curiosity to us. Now, it might have to do with the segmentation of the users. We're looking at everybody in one mass segmentation, so we're not breaking this down in this particular point of view. It's really just a broad set of consumers across the whole industry. But interesting enough, beverage and package was the #1 conversation item as it related to the cruise industry while we're in this moment. And I think this is like an area that was a surprise for us, and one that we want to dig into and explore a little bit more. But you can clearly see that health, protection, and hygiene has jumped into the set, as well as ease of cancellation and refunds. So consumers have pushed away all of the things that drove the entire industry for the last 20 years, and they now have moved forward to a smaller set of drivers that seem to be really important to them, and may represent interesting opportunities to stimulate demand here in the short term, with how you incentivize people to get back onto vessels and take cruises. And the other, how companies have to respond at a reputation and operational level for things like handling cancellations and refunds. Now, one of the things that we saw in the research at a deeper level of inspection was the health and protection and hygiene both is a positive driver and increasingly a negative driver. So there are negative attitudes associated with this driver that the industry really has to grapple with, and is creating a lot of concern. So there's work to be done here to understand for each company how health and hygiene is related to their brand, and how they're going to build a set of capabilities to be able to respond to it in a way that's reflective of their personality. And the key in all of this is that companies have to be authentic to who they are. And, as somebody in the branding world and looks at the messaging that's being put out from a universal point, I think the cruise industry is actually falling flat on being able to have a story and a response, and the ability to actually tell their story, because ships inherently have the ability to deliver on these attributes and on these drivers, but they have not done a good job of getting out in front of the narrative that's being put forward in the media to be able to tell their story effectively. And sitting back and waiting without innovation driving here in the short term is I think a mistake. And so, the brands now really have to put a stake in the ground as to what they're going to do, and the industry has to carry the torch much more effectively on telling their brand stories to be able to weather this and really advance. And it's a tremendous opportunity for innovation, to build competitive advantage, and to establish relationships with consumers that are deeper and have greater loyalty than ever before. And so one of the things that we think is coming out of this is that consumers, in large part, are going to be yearning for these opportunities, these experiences, but they have to be different than they were before. And just going back to the same playbook is going to be, I think, a recipe for dismal results into the future, because you won't be able to stimulate the demand and build the brand connections that are going to be required. So we're, optimistic. There's a near-term challenge that's going to require significant innovation and operation to be able to get up and going again. And as Peter and Shannon and others have pointed to, this requires more connection with consumers to understand what those innovations need to be, and using what we call co-imagination to be able to deliver that. And that can even be done in a virtualized realm right now. That's how our firm is doing it. And understanding and innovating rapidly to be able to build a new value chain for consumers, and then over the long term being able to drive their brands forward as with a continuous form of innovation and building new cultures across the whole industry to be able to create resilience in the brands and their operations. So that's where I wanted to leave it today, but I think it's one optimistic point of view. If the industry turns now to really think about their own stories and how they're going to build their companies and their brands moving forward. I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you so much. That was, yeah.
Yeah, we're gonna, people are interested in the research. We most certainly could have a separate session to dive in deeper and share, deeper results. So we're, feel free to email me at hbridwell@tenetpartners.com, and happy to, continue that conversation on what we're learning about what's under the hood at this point. So thanks again.
That's really great. I think it's going to be critical for every cruise brand to address all these questions and concerns to regain the trust in cruising in the industry, both from a guest perspective, but also from the investor perspective, that you actually believe in our industry. So I'm sure you will have a lot of work to do there, Hampton and your team. So thank you so much for both to you and to Shannon for a brilliant presentation. Very informative and very inspiring.
Thank you.
So with that, we're a little bit over time, but that's no worries. We have half an hour for a panel discussion now. So we have a few questions here that we have listed up that we would like to ask you as experts. We are also open to any questions that the audience would like to send to us, and we'll pass it on to the real experts here. So I would like to begin with asking an open question to you in the panel here. As we know, cruising is all about relaxing and enjoying life. What do you see as the biggest complications as new safety measures have to be implemented on the ships? Shannon, what would you say there?
Sorry, I couldn't hear that.
Okay, I'll take that again. Cruising, as we all know, cruising is all about relaxing and enjoying life. What do you see as the biggest complications as we have new safety measures implemented on the ships? What are the big complications there?
Yeah, I don't see them as complications. I think it's up to us to work out how we integrate this into the standard onboarding and disinfectation of passengers, and use it as opportunities, to progress the industry and for ourselves, our own brand, to be at the forefront. So we see more of it as an opportunity than a negative. And I guess people that are like our clients have always been like, we've been at the forefront. So coming into this industry pretty fresh and pretty green, we'd always heard about the food poisoning, etc. So health and safety, all that stuff was a center point for design right from the start.
And we can see that as a challenge from a design perspective, that we don't want to walk onto the ship and it looks like a hospital or some kind of institution where everything is clinical and sterilized and there's lots of machinery everywhere, and the food is stored away where you can't really see it or touch it. And
that's not how it's going to be. So, like in our model, getting the buffet, we did that 3 years ago. We've got more of a small restaurant style. So think about traveling through Europe and going to a 10-seat, tapas place, or drinking a Aperol Spritz at the Aperol Spritz bar dedicated to it. so smaller, more intimate experiences. And I think the best comparison to give it is, remember going into a bank 20, even 10 years ago and going to the tellers? Imagine going into the bank today. It's completely different. It's like you're going into a bar or a hotel. That's sort of how it is. So I think we've just got to, this is an opportunity for us to, use this situation as an opportunity to just reinvent instead of panicking.
It's very true. We did if I may just pull an example, we did a little design work for P&O Australia a few years ago, where they went for the sentence was ban the buffet. They actually went away from buffet dining altogether, and instead went for something they call a semi-self-service, which means you walk up to a counter and the counter is kind of something to signal what you're being served there. So you have an Indian counter, for instance. You walk up to the Indian counter and they ask for a tikka masala, and they hand you a plate over the counter with a nice little dish, with a nice portion serving of your dish of your choice. And what they found was that they cut the food waste in half. There was hardly any queues because everybody walked to the place where they food they liked, and also the customer satisfaction went through the roof. And on top of that, it would of course be advantageous from a safety and hygienic point of view, that you don't have to touch your food. You may reduce the risk of food poisoning and so forth. So it sounds like a concept for the future, but I'm sure there's going to be lots of innovation in that field from all angles. So that's
one thing to add to it is the whole notion of designing the entire customer journey. So thinking beyond just the ship too, and so there's such huge design opportunities to help ports across the world rethink how they are organized, receive and send ships off, and the facilities that ship owners have to really make a different experience for consumers when they're getting there to get on. And so that whole experience of the customer journey really has to be incorporated into these new design efforts too. So I see design as really having a broader halo across the entire customer journey than perhaps it has before.
That's a very good point. The whole infrastructure, getting to people to and from the ship and on the ship, and not just within the ship, but also to and from the ship, is going to be pretty critical. Another big scope, and that of course depends on a lot more than just the ship owners. It's the ports and the authorities and the local communities, and the ability to build infrastructure around that. So, on that note, we could actually pass to another question that's just come up. Do you think that this situation we have now will affect the choice of destinations from the cruise lines, that they may go to completely different places than they do today in order to avoid risks, or go to the places who can handle it the best, or that kind of aspect? What do you think?
Yeah, so that's a good point. Peter, can you mute the microphone, please? Thanks. All right, so that's a really good question. The way that we're going to be re-looking at this is that, being a residential ship and having a bit more of a flexible sailing schedule, is that we will start to prioritize ports that have I guess, installed better practices for touch with passports, so electronic this and electronic that, just better practices. Obviously, any areas that are showing outbreaks or anything like that, we can navigate around that, because we will always have backup ports to go to, and we call these the My Home at Sea days. So the best part of cruising is sometimes those beautiful like natural landscapes that you see, and in a traditional cruise line, the captain will announce, look, quick, look out the window. We won't be doing that. We'll have opportunities to sit, stop, relax, enjoy. And again, if there's ports that where there's problems, or if if there's things like that, we can choose not to go to those places. And through an app that we have with all our residents, people can start to vote. Now, it's a bit like voting for a prime minister. You've got a choice. You don't get to actually vote with that's open slather. It's, look, here are the three possible places we can go to between, say Venice and Split in Croatia. And here's 2 places or 3 places we can go to in between. Where would you rather go to in between? And we'll do that with plenty of time out, things like that. So involving the consumer more is always been a big part of our business model.
Yeah. Well, that's great, especially for a smaller ship where you have the let's say the mandate from the guest to decide where you go. Maybe that's the model for other ships too. You have a daily vote on board. Who knows? Anyway, have a
Fredrik,
yeah.
Fredrik, may I just comment on that as well?
Yes, of course. Yeah.
So if you look at it a little bit more immediate, let's say looking in August, September, and October, something that we all need to bear in mind is that the choice may not be the cruise. The choice is the port stating, I want you to come to my port, because they must feel comfortable with that ship coming into the port. It's going to be a very dynamic world over the next 12 to 24 months, where there's going to be a discussion between the ports and the vessel owner. And I think it's going to be incredibly important to get to a level where not only the guest and crew feel comfortable to come back on board, but also the port. And then the port has to convince its own stakeholders, its own citizens, that it's time for us to bring Princess, Carnival, Royal Caribbean back into port. Now, there's a commercial interest because those ports are dying at the moment when you look at the Caribbean without having the passengers, but there's also huge concerns around the issue of COVID-19. And the problem is, very incorrectly, the cruise industry has been labeled as one of the major carriers of COVID-19. This is very inaccurate, but it's unfortunately the way it's been portrayed it, right? So there is some other innovations out there today with a group that are looking to create a hospital system that will sit in the free trade zone of each port. So if there is infected guests or crew, they can be taken care of in the port and not enter into the island's own healthcare system. So we need to think very big. We need to think in the totality and holistically around how we manage this, because I think you all would agree that the issue where the cruise lines are going is absolutely not up to the cruise industry anymore.
Yeah, and just to add something to that, this is where at an industry level, some level of standardization of protocols really needs to happen to be able to create a moment for every brand to have a halo that they can sit underneath in much the same ways that sustainability is being done for major corporations. That kind of certification process, that there's a stamp of approval that then can actually help build that trust with the port owners and the stakeholders within countries is I think a vital thing. So that, if you will, a consortium of players need to come together to try to build some standardization along these lines, and that then needs to be incorporated into the brands themselves. And that is, I think, would be a really important step for the port owners to be able to display that kind of certification for the ships, and for the industry to create the halo for everybody to live under. And that requires, again, unified action, which I think this session is all about trying to help promote that. But building that certification could be a great step forward. And even, I think this notion of like the free trade areas and rapid response teams that the cruise industry can actually build in a unified way could really make a big difference. So it's those kinds of actions that could be super critical here in the short term, and innovations for the long term.
Would that happen under the umbrella of, let's say, Thalia, or would it be Storylines, or who would the people be who would control this or drive the development of local medical facilities, for instance, in the port?
So if I may, they look. I know there is a group out of Florida at the moment that have created a concept, and I think this is. I don't think this is an industry-wide initiative. It needs to be accepted by the industry, and it needs to be accepted by the various ports around the world. But it's a private enterprise that are building a consensus around the industry, and there's a number of stakeholders that are getting involved in that aspect of it. So we think that there is a lot of value in that. And coming back to Hampton's point, I think it's very important that we do get the standards set, and the standards are probably going to be a balance between CLIA, CDC, Healthy Gateways, and all of the other kind of regulators out there, Flag State, IMO. That aside, that's going to take a long time. That aside, I believe that the class societies have a place to play right now. I think we need to work collaboratively to be able to define what is the standard. And I'm not suggesting that the class is going to set the standards, and I think that CLIA definitely have that role to be able to set minimum standards. But with those standards, we're going to be able to create certainty for the guest and crew and the ports. And that's what we need to do. And we work with a number of cruise line clients, both in the US as well on the international market. The cruise lines are going to start early. They all focus on one thing. They're focusing on creating credibility with their local port communities where they're going to come in and dock their ships. So everything right now is almost like a PR strategy. It is to communicate and create a sense of confidence in the totality of the industry. And I'm just going to say one more thing again. The cruise industry is a safe environment, has always been a safe environment. It was never a bad environment. What they're doing, they're increasing what is perfect to even better. And then what they have to do, they just have to communicate it well into the industry.
If I just add something to that, I think we get a bad rap because we're a low-hanging fruit. Everyone loves cruise, and it's always a good story, which brings to my next point, even that carries even more weight. When we do get back out there, if there is a second wave and it's not handled well, that could really, really impact cruise ships. So collectively, if we don't get together and work out some solutions and make some pledges to the public as a group and get everybody on board, so we're all talking the same cohesive message, and something does go wrong, that's bad for everybody.
Yes, it's a matter of survival for the whole industry, how this is handled.
Yeah, if I may just comment to Shannon's point, and just very quickly, into the future, what we're all hoping for is immunity. So when we're starting to see the herd immunity, the vaccines, we all have the antibodies, we hope that there's going to be a situation where we're going to see less concern about COVID-19. But as I'm sure you all have seen in the media, there is absolutely concern if there isn't a strong immunity into the future. So we need to bear in mind that there might be a situation where we're not going to be able to build immunity that we're hoping for. But if we can get that immunity, if we can clearly demonstrate that with the antibodies, I am immune, then I think in the next 9 months to, let's say, 18 months, we're going to be in a much better position. But if we don't get the immunity,
that's great. We have a few questions coming in from the audience here. Per, I'll hand the mic over to you and share some of the inquiries that have come in.
Okay, so we have a few questions. We started off with to the panel. Do you feel that IoT and connected technologies could improve safety and health on board going forward? So I guess that is about wearables and about time scheduling. How do we handle the space? Perhaps space is, will be, you could say there's more need for space on ships to keep distance, etc. Do you see that there's technology ready to help out? those cases.
Is the question using technology to ensure that you have social distancing on board? Is that the question?
Could be, yes.
I'm sure there is RFID technology and other types of technologies built into your phone to be able to monitor that, but that's my area of expertise, and I'm not sure that we as humans would want to be that controlled. So I think there is a social discussion around how we control social distancing, and it's way beyond my pay grade.
Yes, I do agree. That being said, most or many people carry Apple Watches that measure their heart rate and perhaps could measure their body temperature, stuff like that. So actually, I think we will see a lot of initiatives, technological initiatives in this field.
So I agree with that, using technology to measure your health, and I would totally agree with that.
Yes, this may be another area where we will need a collective approach. We sometimes make the parallel with the car industry and the navigation systems that the car industry has developed. And then still, when you jump in your brand new Audi or BMW, you still use your Apple or your Google Maps on your phone because it's better than any of the navigation systems in the car. So I guess if all the cruise brands would develop their own individual systems, we'll be lagging behind quite a few years, and it may be better to go for some third-party solution or develop something collectively that's tailor-made for our industry.
Well, this is where something open source, if one of the cruise lines, puts out something that they just realistically should open source it.
Yeah.
Available.
That's probably, that's a good point. That should be, for everything we discuss here, it should be open source kind of thing. It should be shared with the whole industry, and no trade secrets between brands, when it comes to addressing all these critical.
So this, I think we've just got to put practice before profit.
Exactly.
And just from our perspective, just so everyone on this call realizes, there is a very collaborative industry approach to this issue, and everyone is sharing freely best practices on the healthcare side, and they work really hard to create the safest possible healthcare environment on board. So I would say that the industry is working very closely, collaboratively to create this environment at the moment. It may not all be in the public eye, but they work very hard collectively.
Yes, yeah, good point. We touched briefly on another topic on what Storylines are doing is to combine safe cruising and sustainability. So one of the questions we have on our list here is, when this is all over, do you think, and when the topic of sustainability will probably resurface as the number one question to focus on, how do we focus, or sorry, how do we ensure that the measures we take now are not in conflict with our care about the environment? As an example, we could say the ventilation systems may have to be more separated and more bringing in more fresh air from outside and so forth, which probably increases the energy consumption on board and so forth. I think I'll pass that question to Maurizio from a more technical point of view, engineering point of view. If you're still with us, Maurizio.
Yes, I mean, first of all, there is I was before mentioning the new rules of the safe return to port, which are indirectly connected also to, let's say, matters such as social distancing and compartmentation of the ships. First of all, for what concerns you know very well that on the upper decks, I'm sorry, I'm very pragmatic, very technical, but close to the funnel, there are always these huge grates which are very noisy and which product, I mean, mainly the air inlet and outlet for the ventilation system. Very often, these grids for just a matter of practical questions are settled very close to the funnel where you have the exhaust with the PM10 and other particular matters which are polluting, which are so easily taken inside the vessel, inside the ship. So we have not, first of all, to forget that as there were some transport of technologies from on board to ashore, we have now ashore the possibility of building greenhouses. And we had a long discussion with you and with Per in particular with the green ship concept, which I think is strictly connected with this. If you think just that you have the opportunity of using even low-cost additives to present fuel, heavy fuel, or you can use systems like LNG, you have some sort of recovery systems from the heating of the engines or the compressors that can be transformed into steam, for instance, which again just produces as a waste just water at the end, just vapors of water. And you have also the opportunity of using glass walls, for instance, that can be connected with photovoltaic systems for the production of your own energies. So there are really plenty of devices which just need to be combined in technologies. And as ever it happened in history, a ship is really a place where it can be, let's say, like a lab for experimenting how to best fit and connect these type of technologies. So I really see that we can really create vessels which are made of non-polluting materials, which are able to self-contain much better than what it happens ashore, their wastage, and even recover energy from it, and so reducing enormously any polluting effect. I just wanted also to mention something more general. What was your very first question regarding, let's say, the fact that ships should not, nobody would like to go on board a vessel that looks like a hospital, of course. It was very interesting to see that at least in the pre-COVID situation, one of the most targeted answers of people that have been called for the poll was connected with the design and the pleasantness of the public spaces and of the environment on board. I think all of us that has been on board many ships had such as, how can I say, not a favorite one, but we had ships that when you go on board gives you a sort of coziness, of a pleasant feeling. And so I think that we should really work also on what is between the lines, the perception of the brain that sometimes is not, let's say, just through the logical process of our brain, but just the feeling of being in a safe and healthy environment, which is made of many disciplines, of course. But in this case, talking specifically of the interior designer, there is the possibility of creating this sort of general feeling of being in a cozy, welcoming, relaxing place. So I think that everybody that goes on a cruise wants, first of all, to be in an environment which gives him or her pleasure. And the good part of this is that being in, say, in good moods or feeling in a safe and healthy environment increases your immunitary system. So it's just a process that is a circling process, which should be really thought about and developed in the best way possible.
Yes, that's great. Thank you so much, Maurizio, for that. And I guess it kind of summarizes what I think we all realize, that we have to enter this new parameter or factor into the equation of designing safe and reliable and healthy ships, and then they have to be sustainable, and they have to be fantastic to look at and be in, and also be just as profitable as before, or even better so. So that's the balance we have to walk in the future altogether, you know. And there's going to be a lot of innovation and a lot of exciting challenges for us, I think, in the future. So let's use this whole situation to improve ourselves and sharpen the pencil, and make sure our industry becomes even better and stronger and more competitive for the future. I think we're close to deadline. I would just like to pass the microphone over to Per if there was any final outstanding question, or we should round off.
I think it's been a good touching upon a lot of questions. I'm quite confident that it has created more questions, even if we answered quite a few. This topic is, of course, very big, and it spreads from all the med technical to communication, and how do we actually explain that the ships are already quite okay, and you would clean your hands on a ship the last 10 years, the way we've been cleaning them on land for a few months. This is a thing that we need to communicate. On the upside, there was a customer survey that the Cruise Line International Association, they did. It was just released a few days ago, and it said they have been two times per year they have been surveying how people who have been cruising and people who have not been cruising, if they are willing to take a cruise, and the numbers are actually a bit surprising. So for people who have been cruising before, this autumn, 79% would say that they would likely or very likely book another cruise. That number went down from 79 to 75 this spring, so 4% lower, which is not what you would expect when you hear the news about the cruise industry, and more or less the same decline from people who have not been cruising, from 71 to 66%, so a 5% decline. So perhaps what we see in the headlines is a bit amplifying the feeling that is out there, which is very hopeful for us in our industry. So just to finish off on a positive note, this has been a first for us, this webinar. We do like to be part of the discussion in our industry. We do like we actually, in a way, I enjoy that we are right now much more open than we have been when it was only competition. Now there is a sense of community within the cruise industry. Who would have imagined this is a new. So this is, and it's very nice to be in that community right now, even if it's very hard in many ways. So that was my final words, I guess.
Thank you for that, Per. Are there any final comments from the panelists or from anyone else before we round off for today? I'll take that as a no. And then
thank you. It's been a really pleasurable. Learned a lot.
Great.
So it's great.
Thanks very much for the opportunity to present, and thanks for everybody for staying on for the allocated amount of time. Appreciate it.
You bring openness and good willingness to the industry. So I think that we really appreciate this initiative, and we really hope that it's the start of a cooperation and a new way of thinking of the business. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, all of you. And we will, as said before, we will issue all the questions and answers and all the presentations and also the recording of this webinar very shortly to you all. So thank you again for participating. We couldn't have done this obviously without you, so thanks for all your great input, and thank you to the audience who sent a lot of good questions and comments during the webinar. So thank you all, and we'll be back shortly with a follow-up, I'm sure. All right.
Great day, everybody.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Good night.
Take care. Regards from Sweden.